If you drive across the heart of the North American continent today, you're basically traversing a landscape that was once a tropical nightmare. I mean, right now, beneath the soil of the United States, Mexico, and Canada lie the fossilized remains of creatures that make the most famous land dinosaurs look like appetizers. This was the Western Interior Seaway. It was a prehistoric, shallow ocean that literally split North America into two island continents, Laramidia to the west and Appalachia to the east. It was a world where the rules of the land just didn't apply, and where the most massive predators in history collided in a claustrophobic aquatic arena. Today, we're diving into a place where the ocean was far more dangerous than the land, and where the same coordinates you might visit on a summer road trip were once a tropical abyss. Let's get a sense of the scale of this aquatic empire. This sea existed for roughly 34 million years, spanning from the early Cretaceous, about 100 million years back, all the way to the earliest Paleocene epoch 66 million years ago. At its peak during the Campanian age of the late Cretaceous, specifically between 83.6 and 72.1 million years ago, this environment was a powerhouse of biological diversity. It was a warm, tropical world, stretching over 2,000 miles in length. At its widest point, the sea spanned 600 miles. It's genuinely surreal to realize that a drive through the flat plains of Kansas was once a plunge into a tropical void. But here's where it gets interesting. The water was remarkably shallow for its vast size. While its deepest point was possibly only 900 meters, the average depth was likely around 50 meters, or about 150 feet. To put that in perspective, that's barely deeper than the height of a 15-story building. This compressed all that prehistoric violence into a tight vertical space, turning the sea into a high-pressure environment where apex predators were constantly bumping into one another. Given those odds, could any land dinosaur have survived a trip into these waters? The discovery of this world is a story of ego and obsession. During the late 19th century, the American West became the stage for the Bone Wars. This was a bitter, decades-long rivalry between two paleontologists, Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope. It was a petty, vicious feud. They sabotaged each other's digs and rushed to name species just before the other could. But in their haste, they pulled some incredible secrets from the Kansas chalk. When they first dragged the massive, fossilized jaws of these creatures from the dirt, they were completely baffled. They didn't actually know what they were looking at. Were they whales? Giant prehistoric crocodiles? It took years of study for science to realize that these weren't stray mammals, but an entirely different evolutionary path. Giant aquatic lizards, perfectly evolved for a world that no longer exists. Let's talk about the Mosasaurs. These were an extinct group of aquatic reptiles that claimed total dominion over these waters. If you look at their anatomy, they had body shapes similar to monitor lizards, but they'd replaced their legs with 4 paddle-like flippers and streamlined their bodies to slice through the water. It's fascinating to trace how they shifted their swimming styles over time. The earlier species swam like eels, moving in an undulating fashion, but later mosasaurs evolved to swim more like sharks, using larger, powerful tail flukes to propel themselves forward with explosive speed. Across the seaway, over 10 genera of mosasaurs coexisted, ranging in length from a modest 2 meters to a staggering 18 meters. Take Cladastes, for example. It was the smallest of the 3 most abundant mosasaurs in the region, growing up to 6.2 meters. That's roughly the size of the largest recorded great whites, but Cladastes was narrower and more agile. It used smooth teeth to snatch fish and invertebrates in the shallowest coastal waters, and some evidence suggests it may have even ventured into freshwater. Then we move up in size to Platycarpus. This was a common predator, larger than Cladastes, measuring 7 meters from head to tail and weighing about 1 ton, roughly the same weight as a giant Nile crocodile. However, its hunting strategy was different. Because its teeth were found to be extremely fragile, Paleontologists speculate that Platycarpus likely feasted on smaller fish and soft-tissued squid in the deeper, darker waters. Now, let's look at the true heavy hitter of the region. Enter the Tylosaurus. This animal was one of the largest mosasaurs on the planet and a genuine apex predator, sitting at the absolute top of the marine food chain. To get a sense of scale, adults were between 12 and 15.8 meters long, essentially the same length as a modern humpback whale. But it wasn't just about the size, it was the weaponry. Tylosaurus possessed up to 32 teeth, each one large, thick, recurved, and finely serrated, specifically adapted for tearing through the thick hide of large animals. It didn't just hunt fish, it was a massive living torpedo that targeted plesiosaurs, turtles, birds, bony fish, sharks, and even other mosasaurs. What makes it truly terrifying is how it fought. Tylosaurus used its snout as a built-in battering ram to bash its prey. The front of the snout was pure bone, featuring a robustly built knob backed by shock compression structures to protect the brain. It was hyper-aggressive, attacking nearly everything it encountered, including members of its own species. We know this because adult specimens routinely bear permanent damage from competitors. In one extreme case, a Tylosaurus actually fatally rammed and smashed the brain case of another mosasaur. But there is one creature that stood above all others. Mosasaurus was the largest of them all. When we look at the size, it's just staggering. It occasionally grew to 17.1 meters long and weighed over 10 tons. Think about the pressure of 16,000 pounds per square inch. That's not just a bite, that's a hydraulic press. Mosasaurus had a powerful bite force of between 13,000 and 16,000 PSI. To put that in perspective, this was 4 times the power of a modern saltwater crocodile's bite. Now, how did it find its prey in the dim, silt-heavy currents of the seaway? It used powerful binocular vision to target prey in murky waters, allowing it to judge distance and depth with lethal precision. It was the absolute apex, but it wasn't alone in its size. Prognathodon was another mosasaur that was only 25% smaller than Mosasaurus. 2 such giants colliding in a shallow sea would have been a sight of pure, visceral terror. Wait, but what about the edges of the water? That's where the Deinosuchus lived. It was one of the largest crocodilians to ever exist, patrolling the bays and estuaries on both the eastern and western sides of the seaway. While the populations in the east were more common, those in the west were fewer but larger, reaching a staggering 12 meters in length. Think about the weight of 8.5 tons of muscle and armor. This beast was covered in large, heavy osteoderms, hemispherical plates that were once mistaken for ankylosaurus armor. These plates didn't just protect the animal, they served as attachment points for muscle and tissue to help it move on land. And the power? It's overwhelming. Deinosuchus had a bite force potentially greater than a fully grown T-Rex, with some studies estimating over 100,000 newtons. That is 5 times the power needed to crush a modern car. It didn't care if you were a marine turtle, a large fish, or even a dinosaur that ventured too close to the shoreline. One snap, and the struggle ended instantly. Beyond the armored predators, there were the shelled krakens of the deep. The Cretaceous cephalopods in this ocean were among the biggest of their kind, rivaling modern colossal and giant squid. Some of these creatures, like Tusoteuthis and Ankyloteuthis, belong to the extinct Enot family. Now, here is the fascinating part. While Tusoteuthis and Ankyloteuthis looked like squids, they were actually more closely related to modern octopuses. It's a remarkable overlap of form and function. If you can picture a creature with the agility of an octopus, but the size and silhouette of a giant squid, well, you have the nightmare that swam alongside the mosasaurs. Then there was Parapuzosia, a shelled cephalopod that grew an 11-foot wide shell, essentially the size of a small car. It was the heaviest invertebrate in history. But the mosasaurs and crocodiles weren't the only speed demons here. Enter the Ginsu shark, or Cretoxorhina. If you were a smaller fish or even a juvenile mosasaur, this was your greatest fear. This shark grew to be about 7 meters long and could burst through the water at speeds approaching 43 miles per hour. It was a precision-engineered killer. We have fossil evidence of these sharks biting through the armor of turtles and even the bones of other large predators. Unlike the mosasaurs that dominated with raw size, the Ginsu shark was a master of high-speed interception, a sleek, gray-white missile that turned the open water into a hunt, not just a holding pen. Then there was the X-fish, Xiphactinus. Imagine a 6-meter-long, bulldog-faced horror with a mouth that looked like a jagged, vertical trapdoor. This fish was capable of swallowing prey almost half its own size in a single gulp. We know this because paleontologists have found fossils of Xiphactinus with an entire smaller fish, a Gillicus, perfectly preserved inside its ribcage. It's the ultimate prehistoric receipt. This wasn't just survival. This was a fish that could unhinge its jaw to consume massive targets, ensuring that even if you were big enough to challenge other predators, you were still just a meal for the Xiphactinus. Finally, we have to look at the plesiosaurs. These are the creatures that seem almost comical, with long, serpentine necks and small, pinhead brains. But beneath that weird silhouette was a specialized hunter. Their teeth were like interlocking cages, perfect for snatching smaller, slippery prey that would escape the heavy jaws of a mosasaur. It was a different kind of stealth, a slow-moving, long-necked phantom drifting through the water, luring fish in close before the snap. They represent a different evolutionary solution to the same problem: how to survive in a sea where every single thing you pass is either trying to eat you or is something you intend to eat. For millions of years, this shallow sea was the most violent neighborhood on Earth. From the 16,000 PSI crushing grip of the Mosasaurus to the 100,000 newtons of force delivered by the Deinosuchus and the drifting 11-foot shells of the giant cephalopods, it was a world where only the most specialized killers survived. But all that armor, size, and raw power meant nothing against a rock from space. When the asteroid hit 66 million years ago, the resulting tsunamis and climate collapse wiped the slate clean in an instant. Today, we walk across the American Midwest, oblivious to the fact that we are stepping over the graves of these titans. It's a strange, humbling irony. These monsters only existed because of a unique geographic accident, a seaway that vanished as quickly as it appeared. If the asteroid hadn't struck, would these marine nightmares have eventually conquered the land? Or would something even larger have evolved to hunt them?